Thank you for watching. This is the introduction to my grandfather's story from Auschwitz to survival and becoming refugees, arriving to Palestine and then New York City, where I was born. The original book of my grandfather and his story is Der Tatteh heißt Laufen. The father says run, and that's my grandfather's name, Pinchas Yeshaya Kornblue. And the English is Tatteh said run. I'm gonna start reading the Yiddish. If it's too complex to translate in real time, then of course I'll switch to the English one. So chapter 1 is Aleph A, and it says: Mit der Tränen geschickte Stimme hat sich der Tate gewindet sie ins vier Geschwister. With a tearful and constricted Stimme, voice, hat sich der Tate gewandt. The father went over to share zu uns vier Geschwister, to us four siblings. Drei Brüder, three brothers, and ein einzige Schwester, and only one sister. Welche haben sich herumgesetzt beim Tisch, which were all seated around this table, hat gesagt, the father said, Teure Kinderlich, dear children, es sei schwer, aber ich muss euch sagen, but I must tell you, in wie schwer es kommt mir on, and how hard it is to arrive for me to hear. Feel ich aber, as ich muss alles verkicken. I feel though that I must look at everything aside, and in mit Liebschaft bete ich euch, ihr sollt mich Geduld aushören, and with love I ask of you that you should patiently hear me out, in Git einkritzen, and deeply engrave in eure Sekuren, into your memory, meine herzige, vaterliche, meine herzige, my heartful, futterliche, fatherly Wörter. I'm going to read the rest in English, and if you want the Yiddish readings, you can contact me and I will do Yiddish readings privately. So the English book, of course, starts with the left side. Beautiful picture of my grandfather with a grandson on his lap. April 1944 is the prologue. Chapter 1, Abandoning Our Childhood Home a Year Before the War. Reb Pinchas Yeshaya reminisces, I grew up in a peaceful, content home situated on the busy main thoroughfare of a city known as Chassidic, Czechoslovakia. It was a large, sprawling border city situated exactly on the Czech-Polish border. Interestingly, the area of the city where we lived was part of the Czech Republic, while the other half of the city across the river belonged to Poland. In order to travel from one side of the city to the other, one needed to cross a heavily guarded bridge and provide travel documents. This was a most challenging venture, not easily undertaken unless all of one's documents were in order. Like most Balei Batim, like most homeowners in those days, fathers of the house, Tatteh, a learned and respected Talmud Chacham, his father was a scholar, a religious scholar, struggled to provide for his family by engaging in various business deals. One frequent deal involved importing apples from Khust in the Carpathian region of Hungary and selling the delicious fruits locally. In addition, Tatteh invested in a knitting machine and sold sweaters in order to supplement our income. Life was pleasant, even idyllic. Although Mama had passed away when we were very young, our stepmother was a warm, kindly woman who raised us with love and devotion. Here's a photograph of the divided city. On the left is Poland. We attended the local cheder, the religious school, and learned with Tatteh in the evenings. As we matured, we also helped Tatteh with his apple-selling ventures, dragging the crates of apples to the marketplace where they fetched a good price. One of the most treasured memories is biting into the crisp, sweet apples, letting the juice dribble down my chin. However, those blissful days were rudely interrupted as the Nazi Party gained momentum and prepared to embark upon their final solution. Kristallnacht, which took place in Germany in November 1938, was a wake-up call. Though we lived far away from the bloodthirsty riots and knew little of what was going on, the ominous atmosphere grew very oppressive from day to day. And then, in that same month, we woke up one day to find Tata and Mama busily packing most of our valuable possessions into rucksacks, preparing to flee for our lives. Many of the neighbors did the same. In one fell swoop, our peaceful, routine existence evaporated before our eyes. What had occurred to shake us out of our complacency? First, a little bit of history. The city of Saskitessin, divided between two countries, had once belonged exclusively to Poland back in the days before World War I. The Poles longingly called it Zaolza and yearned for an opportunity to reoccupy what they considered to be rightfully theirs. Now, as Nazi Germany flexed its muscles preparing to conquer the world, they first set their eyes on Poland, lovingly stretched out their hand in friendship like a caring brother. "Where is your pride?" they chided the Polish president Ignacy Mościcki, who was eager to curry favor with the powerful Germans. "Why do you allow the arrogant Czechs to live on your land and rule your former citizens?" Ignacy Mościcki was none too eager to take a bloody confrontation with the mighty Czech army led by the Czech president Edward Beneš. However, egged on by the Germans, he decided to shoot some warning bullets in our direction and send a weighty message to his neighbors. In vain did Beneš try to explain to the Poles that the Germans didn't have their best interests at heart and were only trying to curry favors with the Poles and then their country. His warnings fell on deaf ears. Soon the shootings began. Night after night, the Poles aimed their machine guns in our direction as the rat-tat-tat of bullets hitting their mark echoed through the main streets. Since we lived only a few hundred yards away from the border, we were directly in the line of fire. Our lives were in danger. After a few agonizing nights, Tatteh and a few other homeowners who lived on the main street held an urgent meeting that lasted several hours. Their decision? To flee to safety that very day. Thus, one brisk November afternoon, we loaded our most precious possessions onto a small wagon, boarded up our childhood home, and left without a second glance. Tata's knitting machine and other valuables were too cumbersome to take along with us, and so they were abandoned, leaving us without a source of income. Thankfully, we left in the nick of time. 3 days later, after a bloody battle, our beloved city fell into Polish hands and the borders were sealed. We traveled to Chist, where my stepmother's parents lived, in the Carpathian region of Hungary. It was an exhausting journey, filled with anxiety and trepidation. However, even in the small, serene village, our lives were far from peaceful. We were literally penniless, having left everything of value behind. After several weeks, Tata began worrying about a source of income and decided to slip back into Poland to reach our abandoned home and see whether anything could be salvaged or perhaps cultivate some business contacts. It was a risky trip which could take many weeks. Tata was reluctant to leave us alone, without a firm guiding hand during those dangerous days, and so we were divided amongst relatives. As the eldest, I was sent along with my sister Rivka to Munkac, where we stayed with my mother's sister Tsivia and her husband Yuda Leibklein, who had no children of their own. My uncle, a wealthy businessman who owned a bustling textile firm, welcomed us with open arms, and my aunt was like a doting mother. My brother Herschel was sent to my mother's brother, Motje Felbebaum, who lived in Borsa, Romania, while my youngest brother Bero was sent to another uncle, Avrom Felberbaum, who lived in Jaso, near Kashal. Thus, for the time being, we were homeless refugees eagerly awaiting our father's return. Intoxicated with their victory in encouraging Poland to annex part of Czechoslovakia, which would soon become theirs with the invasion of Poland, Germany once more turned her attention to Czechoslovakia, this time greedily eyeing the Sudetenland. This fertile area in southern Czechoslovakia was home to approximately 3 million German citizens. "Since your land is home to so many of our upstanding citizens, it is only fair that we annex the Sudetenland to our country," they requested. Naturally, this polite request was accompanied by the very real threat of war. Germany was then at the height of its power, and all trembled in fear of being caught in Hitler's paws. Bennis was in a quandary. Should he simply slice a juicy piece of his country off the map and hand it to Germany on a silver platter? On the other hand, was he willing to enter into a costly, bloody war which Germany would probably win in any case? He consulted with his two allies, France and England, who immediately grasped the seriousness of the situation. Both countries had a pact with Czechoslovakia that if attacked, they would come to each other's aid. Now, during these turbulent times, with the threat of war hanging over the country, England dispatched its master statesman and Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, to meet with Hitler and discuss the future of Sudetenland. Czechoslovakia hoped the meeting would be fruitful and Chamberlain would manage to appease Hitler without much loss of land. Sadly, their hopes were to be cruelly dashed. On September 15, 1938, Neville Chamberlain met with Hitler and engaged in intense negotiations. However, the meeting was a bitter disappointment as Chamberlain double-crossed the Czechs and handed the Sudetenland to Hitler, thus trying to prevent another world war. Of course, Chamberlain had no inkling that by empowering Germany, he was actually emboldening their goal of ruling the world, bringing the Second World War that much closer. To give our readers some clarity about the important developments that would greatly impact the war, I have included the following excerpt of Chamberlain's historical national address. Britain and France at first tried to appease the Germans, hoping that Hitler would not drag Europe into another costly war. Appeasement was the British way of healing the wounds of World War I and of correcting what many thought were the injustices of the Versailles Treaty. On September 27, 1938, when negotiations between Hitler and Chamberlain were filled with tension, the British Prime Minister addressed the British people. Excerpts of the speech are included here. Here is a photograph of the British Prime Minister addressing the British people. And it says, I can well understand the reasons why the Czech government has felt unable to accept the terms which have been put before them in the German memorandum. Yet I believe I should do this in a British accent, yet I believe after my talks with Herr Hitler, that if only time were allowed, it ought to be possible for the arrangements for the transferring the territory that the Czech government has agreed to give to Germany to be settled by agreement. When we were convinced, as we became convinced, that nothing any longer would keep the Sudetenland with the Czechoslovakian state, we urged the Czech government as strongly as we could to agree to the cession of territory, and so goes. From the above, we can see how Chamberlain thought he was saving Europe from a bloody war. However, by not standing up to Hitler, he empowered Germany and encouraged their next project, the invasion of Poland and the destruction of its Jews. On September 29, 1938, one day after Tzomgedalia, the beginning of the high holidays, the bitter news spread through the Jewish community in Carpathia. The Germans had succeeded in annexing the fertile Sudetenland, and we were now pressuring Hungary, their next target, to annex the Carpathian region of Czechoslovakia to their country. This region included the towns of Ungvar, Zalisch, Munkacs, and Gist, where we resided. Before World War I, these towns had belonged to Hungary, but were ceded to Czechoslovakia after the war. In November of that year, Germany solicitously invited Hungary to take back what was rightfully theirs. The Czechs were once more caught in a vice, unable to protect themselves without their allies, who were unwilling to go to war about mere land. However, they did manage to negotiate with Hungary and agreed to hand over half of the Carpathian region, including the towns of Ungvar and Munkacs. I was staying with my uncle in Munkacs at the time and was apprehensive about being trapped in Hungary with no way to cross the border. Thus, the night before the planned transfer was to take effect and the Hungarian soldiers would march into Munkacs, I escaped to Zalisch, which was now at the edge of the new Czechoslovakian border. In Zalisch, I joined the renowned yeshiva, the Hebrew school, of Rav Shmuel Greenwald, the Yarer-Ruv, the rabbi of Yar, where I learned with Hasmoda, with a lot of focus. Since my father was in Poland and the yeshiva had no kitchen, I ate teig, days, which is sharing meals, with the local villagers, who welcomed me with open arms. I shall never forget their kindness. Those were peaceful days, the calm before the storm. So this is the end of chapter 1 of my grandfather's book. And the reason I started reading it today is because I want to uphold our family tradition. During the Passover Seder, we're at Magid, the reading portion, where we are commanded to tell the stories and to speak the stories of triumph from slavery to liberation. This Auschwitz story of my grandfather, it's quite thick. I think it's a pretty telling story. When I read it, when it first came out, I was 23 years old, and I read it on a fast day, and I went straight from reading it into through the night. I did not break my fast because I had to finish the last chapter where my father was born. So it's quite interesting to go through these historical books because the accuracy has been verified, and I wanted to just go back to the Yiddish portion where I'm reading a little bit more about the next chapter, starting with Yiddish. So he's describing where he had the good days back in the yeshiva. So here it's talking about November 1938. Bekannt geworden die Parsche zwischen Czech and Hungary. So he finishes the story and he says that over there in the town of Zelish, where he went to yeshiva, habe ich gelesen bei Harav Hagun Reb Shmuel Grimwald. Hashem Yinkum Dum, may God take revenge on his blood. The Jahre Ruf. Gelernt habe ich mit Tatteh. I learned with him truly. Aber mein Mense Koch is nicht, the kitchen is nicht gewesen in the yeshiva. They had no kitchen in this school. In Essen hat man doch gemisst. Eating I must have had to do, weil in Kemach, in Teure, because im ein Kemach, without flour, ein Teure, there is no Torah. And it is a prohibition to starve oneself because it takes away from concentration of Torah study. So here's bringing it up im ein Kemach and Torah. In azoi wie man Tatteh is dort gewesen in Poland, and because my father was still back in Poland now, habe ich nicht gehabt ein gehörige Heim. I did not have a regular home. Habe ich mich gemisst schaffen Tag. I had to arrange for myself Tag, days, to Essen. So he was sort of visiting village families, and like Tuesday you got soup at the Klein family, something like that. And these are teenagers, yeah? Was dus hat bedeutet jeden Tag, which was including every single day, to essen bei a zweite Mishpuche, to eat at a secondary family, fin Yidden Rachmonim benai Rachmonim, from Jews who pitied who were the sons of those who are Rachmonim benai Rachmonim, those who take pity, who are the sons of those who have taught them to take pity. Welche haben mamisch mit Messias Nefesh weggerissen von seiner Brot, who seriously, with sacrificing their lives, teared away a piece of their own bread. Und haben gewollt, huben a heilig in aushalten, die Bucherem, welche lernen the heilige Teure, and who wanted to have a part in supporting the teenage boys who were learning the Holy Torah. Einem von den Balabutim, wie ich hab gegessen Tag, is gewesen Harav Hagun Reb Yaakov Berkovich. Also, may God revenge his blood. One of the people that he ate was at the Berkovich household. The Tatteh, and he's giving the lineage of the Berkovitzes, who was the father of Reb Chaim, Reb Yosef Mordche, of Wusses Voinen in Brooklyn, who live in Brooklyn today. So, you know, the descendants of the people who tore away little pieces of bread became my grandfather's social life in Brooklyn. And then he goes on to the next section where he talks about the Nazi regime, hat noch nicht noch gelost von Czechia, so they hadn't let off out of Czechoslovakia yet. So it goes on to talk about the politics of how Ukraine got involved. And then on the next section, he finishes the chapter about the Ukraine politics. And in the meantime, he's coming of age as a young teenager. So I wanted to wish you all a happy Passover, happy Easter. Please take a moment to share family stories. Otherwise, what's the reason of conducting this meal? I wish you all the courage to speak loud and to be animated, to be theatrical. Bring the children in. The stories have to be told. That is a chassidic tradition. Thank you.